When the light slowly dimmed across the massive AGT arena, a quiet tension filled the air, the kind that settles right before something unforgettable happens. Onto the stage stepped a thin, shy boy named Dallas, a kid whose presence looked far too small for such a gigantic platform. His shoulders were narrow, his jeans were faded, and his shoes looked like they had survived more storms than any child should face. Yet, there was something in his eyes, something steady, almost glowing, a hidden spark that refused to be broken. Dallas wasn't just carrying a microphone. He was carrying his entire life story, the weight of years spent in places where dreams were considered a luxury. He came from a dusty rural corner of America where people teased him endlessly, saying he always had a poor reaction with semen Caldwell, a strange local joke rooted in the fact that he worked daily in muddy cattle sheds, slipping, stumbling, and smelling of farm dust and hay. It was the kind of phrase that followed him everywhere, echoing behind him like a shadow he couldn't escape. But tonight, on the world's most watched talent stage, Dallas wasn't that farm kid anymore. He wasn't the boy who patched up his clothes with needle and thread or the child who practiced singing under old wooden barns, because there were no proper music rooms anywhere near his hometown. He wasn't the kid who walked miles to school, humming melodies to distract himself from hunger. He wasn't the boy who held onto music the way others held onto hope. No, tonight, he stood as something different. Tonight, he was a contender, a challenger of fate, someone who had fought through storms of poverty and loneliness to reach a moment that felt almost impossible. As he reached the center of the stage, his fingers tightened around the microphone, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming gravity of standing on the AGT floor. The judges watched him with curiosity, their expressions softening as they took in his small frame and quiet demeanor. Simon raised an eyebrow, studying him with that sharp, unreadable look he often gives someone he can't quite figure out yet. Heidi smiled kindly, sensing a certain gentleness in him. Sophia leaned forward, trying to understand what this boy's story might be. Howie nodded with encouragement, as if silently telling him, "It's your moment, just breathe." Then Dallas spoke, his voice low but steady, telling them his name, where he came from, and that he would be singing Hotel California. The audience reacted with polite interest. Everyone had heard the song thousands of times before, sung in 100 different versions. They expected another simple cover, another attempt by another hopeful kid. But they had no idea what was coming. The moment Dallas said those words, something shifted, not visibly, but in the air itself, like every sound in the arena paused just to listen to what this small boy would do next. In that instant, Dallas wasn't a kid from a forgotten town. He was a storm-gathering power. As Dallas opened his mouth to sing, something extraordinary happened. Something that no one in the AGT arena, not even the most seasoned judge, was prepared for. The first note that escaped his lips was soft but incredibly pure, like a warm breeze cutting through a cold night. It wasn't just singing, it was storytelling in its most raw and honest form. His voice carried the grit of Detroit, the trembling soul of New Orleans, and the emotional rise of Nashville, all woven into a sound that felt older and deeper than a boy his age should ever possess. Every note he released felt like it had traveled miles across hardship, pain, hope, and the quiet courage of someone who had learned to survive by holding on to music alone. The room shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. Breaths paused. Heads turned. There was a moment where it felt like the entire world tilted toward Dallas, drawn by a force no one could explain. As he eased into the opening lines of Hotel California, the judges exchanged quick glances, the kind that silently say, "Wait, this is different." There was a grit under his voice, a delicate rasp blending with soft control, making the classic song sound reborn, almost unrecognizable in the most beautiful way. Simon's eyebrows lifted, his expression subtly transforming from casual interest to complete focus. Heidi brought her hand up to her chest, leaning forward as if pulled by invisible gravity. Sophia blinked rapidly, her eyes already beginning to glisten in the bright stage lights, overwhelmed by the sudden emotional rush. And Howie, usually animated, sat completely still, stunned by how this tiny boy with worn shoes and a shaky stance could create such a massive sound. Every time Dallas hit a high note, it felt like a confession. His voice trembled with memories of long nights spent alone, working under dim barn lights, humming melodies to drown out loneliness. And every time he dipped into a lower tone, it carried the weight of years spent being underestimated, laughed at, teased with phrases like, "Poor reaction with Seaman Cowell," as if his life was defined by mistakes and mud. But on that stage, those very struggles transformed into something powerful, something magnificent. Halfway through the song, the audience was frozen, some with hands over their mouths, others gripping their seats, and a few already wiping tears. The emotional intensity didn't simply come from his voice. It came from him. From his courage. From the invisible pain stitched between each breath. From the sheer miracle of a boy who had been pushed down by life, but still found a way to rise through music. By the time Dallas reached the chorus, the arena didn't feel like a talent show anymore. It felt like a church, a concert, a confession booth, and a heartbeat all at once. The classic song transformed into a living, breathing moment of truth. Dallas wasn't singing Hotel California. He was releasing it, letting the world feel the story he had lived, note by note, breath by breath, tear by tear. When Dallas released the final trembling note of Hotel California, a silence washed over the arena, a silence so deep it felt like the whole world had paused just to breathe in the moment. For a heartbeat, no one clapped. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if everyone needed an extra second to understand what they had just witnessed. Then, almost like a wave crashing onto a quiet shore, the room burst into emotion. Not cheers at first, tears. The judges were wiping their eyes so openly, so uncontrollably, that even the cameras struggled to keep up. Simon, the judge known for his iron heart and unshakable composure, blinked rapidly, trying to disguise the wet shimmer in his eyes. But he couldn't. He leaned back, exhaled shakily, and whispered something no one expected. "That was unbelievable." Heidi had tears streaming freely down her cheeks, one hand over her mouth, the other gripping the desk as if emotionally anchoring herself. Sophia wiped her tears again and again, her voice cracking when she finally tried to speak. And Howie, usually full of jokes, just stared, stunned into silence, shaking his head slowly, as if trying to understand how a kid like Dallas could carry such overwhelming emotional power. The audience erupted next, people rising to their feet, clapping with everything in them, cheering with voices cracking mid-shout. Some wiped their eyes. Some held their chests. Some hugged strangers beside them. It wasn't just applause, it was gratitude. They weren't clapping because Dallas performed well. They were clapping because Dallas touched something deep inside them, something they didn't know a young boy from a forgotten rural town could reach. Dallas, standing in the middle of the stage, looked overwhelmed. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his eyes flickering with disbelief. Gold stage lights reflected in his tears, turning them into small shining diamonds rolling down his cheeks. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse, not out of exhaustion, but out of the sheer weight of what he had just done. This boy who had been teased for having a poor reaction with Seaman Cowell. This boy who grew up patching his own clothes, who sang under barn roofs and dreamed with an empty stomach, was now standing at the center of one of America's biggest stages, celebrated like a star. Then it happened. A hand slammed down on the golden buzzer. The sound echoed like thunder. A heartbeat later, the entire stage exploded in a storm of gold confetti. It rained down in flashing waves, covering Dallas from head to toe, surrounding him in a sparkling hurricane of victory. He gasped, his hands rising to his face as tears poured freely. The judges stood to their feet, clapping with trembling hands, their faces glowing with pride and shock. Dallas fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the golden rain. In that glittering moment, He wasn't just a boy from nowhere. He wasn't just a kid with a rough past or a strange hometown phrase attached to his name. He was a miracle in motion. He was the story the world didn't know it needed. He was a star being born right before America's eyes.